"Play it again," I told the detective from my hospital bed while the glow from the monitor painted pale blue shadows across the walls of the ICU. My mother was crying in the video. Her hands trembled. Her voice cracked as she called my name over and over again for the camera. But even through the haze of pain medication and exhaustion, I noticed something that made my stomach turn cold. She never once tried to help me. She just kept filming. Detective Ethan Cole stood quietly near the window, his suit wrinkled from what looked like a very long night. Outside, rain slid down the glass in thin silver streaks, blurring the parking lot lights into soft halos. "You don't have to watch this again tonight, Claire," he said carefully. "The doctor said you need rest." But I shook my head slowly against the stiff white pillow. Every movement felt heavy. My throat burned from smoke and dry hospital air, and the skin along my arms was wrapped beneath layers of bandages I tried not to look at. "Please," I whispered. Again. Ethan pressed the tablet screen once more. The video restarted. My mother stood in the kitchen of our family vineyard house wearing the cream-colored sweater she always saved for special occasions. She sounded terrified. Heartbroken. Like the perfect grieving mother from every local news interview I'd watched growing up. But now I could see through it. Her eyes kept darting toward the phone screen instead of toward me. Her breathing stayed calm. Too calm. And at one point, just before the camera tilted downward, I noticed something reflected in the dark oven door behind her. A red gas can sitting beside the kitchen island. Ethan muted the video before the end. Silence settled over the room except for the steady beeping of machines beside my bed. "The insurance company contacted us this afternoon," he said quietly. "Your mother increased the homeowner's policy 4 weeks ago. Triple coverage. She also added a separate injury clause tied to family liability." I stared at the ceiling tiles above me. My mother always thought ahead. Even when I was little, she planned everything down to the smallest detail. Birthday parties for Olivia with rented ponies and live musicians while I got grocery store cupcakes and a quick smile before she hurried off to handle something more important. Olivia was sunshine. Olivia was perfect. Olivia inherited our father's laugh, his blue eyes, his charm. I inherited his stubbornness. At least that's what my mother used to say whenever we argued. "You sound just like your father," she'd snap, like it was some kind of insult. The night everything changed started with one simple question at dinner. A question I probably should have stopped asking years ago. Why does Olivia get the vineyard if Dad wanted us to split everything equally? The room had gone completely silent after that. Olivia slowly lowered her wine glass. My mother looked at me for a long time without blinking. Then she smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. Just cold enough to make me regret speaking at all. I remember standing afterward at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes while rain hammered the windows outside. I remember smelling gasoline before I saw anything unusual. And I remember turning around just in time to see my mother holding her phone up in front of her face like she was already preparing for something terrible to happen. Ethan shifted closer to the bed. "Claire," he said carefully, "do you remember exactly what happened after that?" I closed my eyes. The machines beside me kept beeping softly in the darkness behind my eyelids. My mother's voice echoed somewhere deep in my memory. Calm. Controlled. Almost annoyed. Some daughters, she'd once said after too many glasses of wine, are investments. Others are expenses. When I opened my eyes again, Ethan was still waiting. But I wasn't ready to tell him the truth yet. Because if my mother really believed I remembered nothing, then for the first time in my life, she might finally let her guard down. The hospital kept all the lights dim after midnight, but sleep still never came easily. Every sound seemed sharper in the dark. The squeak of rubber soles in the hallway. The distant buzz of elevators opening and closing. The low murmur of nurses speaking at the front desk. I spent most nights staring at the reflection of my own face in the window beside my bed, barely recognizing the woman looking back at me. My hair had been cut shorter near one side where the doctors treated part of my scalp, and the swelling around my eyes made me look older than 34. Older than I felt just a month ago walking through the vineyards at sunrise with dirt on my boots and coffee in my hand. The Bennett vineyard stretched across almost 40 acres outside Sonoma, California. My father used to say the land breathed differently in the mornings. He loved walking the rows before anyone else woke up, checking the vines himself even after we could afford managers to do it for us. Olivia hated those mornings. She used to complain about the smell of fertilizer and the cold air ruining her hair. Meanwhile, I followed Dad everywhere carrying his tools like some loyal little assistant desperate to earn approval that never fully came. Not from my mother anyway. Diane Bennett loved appearances more than people. Even as a child I understood that much. Our house always looked perfect from the outside. White columns. Fresh flowers by the driveway. Family portraits lining the staircase. But inside, everything revolved around Olivia. Her dance lessons. Her private school tuition. Her horseback riding competitions. When Olivia wanted a new car for her 16th birthday, my mother threw her a catered garden party with string lights hanging from the oak trees. When I turned 16, Dad handed me a used pickup truck with rust near the bumper and whispered apologetically that things had been tight financially that year. I thanked him anyway because I knew the truth. The money had never really been tight. It had simply been spent elsewhere. After Dad got sick 2 years ago, I practically moved into the guest room beside his office. Pancreatic cancer changed him fast. Some days he barely had enough strength to walk from the bed to the porch swing outside. Olivia visited exactly 3 times during his treatment. Once for Thanksgiving photos. Once to ask him questions about investment accounts. And once during the final week when the hospice nurse quietly warned us he probably did not have much time left. My mother still defended her constantly. Olivia has a sensitive heart, she would say whenever I pointed out how absent my sister had become. Not everyone handles illness well. Meanwhile, I handled everything else. Insurance paperwork. Medication schedules. Doctor's appointments. Payroll for the vineyard staff. Bills. Repairs. The endless stream of responsibilities nobody noticed unless they stopped getting done. The morning before the fire, I found Dad's old leather notebook inside his office desk while searching for tax records. Most of the pages contained vineyard notes and weather records written in his careful handwriting, but near the back I discovered something folded between 2 pages. A copy of an older trust agreement dated 3 years earlier. My name appeared beside Olivia's. Equal beneficiaries. Equal ownership. Equal inheritance rights to the vineyard property. I stared at the document for almost an hour sitting alone at Dad's desk while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. Because 3 weeks earlier, after the funeral, Diane and Olivia informed me the entire estate had been left solely to Olivia. Dad changed his mind before he passed, Olivia had said casually while sipping sparkling water in the kitchen. You know how close Mom and I were to him at the end. But that was a lie. And for the first time in my life, I finally had proof that my father never intended to erase me from this family. The next night at dinner, I made the mistake of saying it out loud. Dinner that night felt strangely formal, like one of those stiff holiday meals families force themselves through after an argument nobody wants to mention out loud. Rain hammered the vineyard windows hard enough to rattle the glass, and the dining room smelled faintly of rosemary chicken and candle wax. My mother had lit the expensive candles she only used when guests visited, even though it was just the 3 of us sitting around the long oak table Dad bought 20 years ago at an estate auction. Olivia sat across from me scrolling through her phone between bites of food while my mother poured herself another glass of wine without asking whether anyone else wanted any. Neither of them had spoken much since I came downstairs carrying the copy of the trust agreement folded carefully inside my sweater pocket. I remember staring at the empty chair at the end of the table where Dad always sat. Even after the funeral, none of us moved it. His reading glasses were still inside the drawer beside the china cabinet. His favorite navy jacket still hung near the mudroom door. The whole house felt frozen in the middle of pretending he might somehow walk back inside if we all waited long enough. The irrigation repairs should be finished by Friday, I finally said quietly, mostly to break the silence. Miguel says the North Rows took more storm damage than expected. Olivia barely looked up from her phone. You still acting like you own the place is honestly kind of embarrassing. My mother smiled faintly into her wine glass but said nothing. I felt my stomach tighten anyway. I never said I owned anything, I replied carefully. I just spent the last 2 years keeping this vineyard running while both of you disappeared. Olivia let out a short laugh under her breath. Please. Dad left me the vineyard because I actually understand business. I reached into my sweater pocket slowly and unfolded the copy of the trust agreement onto the table between us. The paper looked yellow beneath the chandelier light. Then maybe you should explain this. For the first time all evening, Olivia stopped smiling. My mother did not even blink. Her expression stayed perfectly calm as she picked up the document and scanned the page. I watched her eyes move slowly across Dad's signature near the bottom. She set the paper back down with almost unsettling composure. That version is outdated, she said smoothly. Your father updated everything before he passed. Then why was this hidden in his private desk? I asked. And why did nobody mention it during probate? Olivia rolled her eyes dramatically and pushed her plate away. Because Dad changed his mind after realizing you were incapable of handling responsibility without getting emotional about everything. The room went very quiet after that. Rainwater slid down the windows in crooked silver lines while somewhere deeper in the house an old pipe knocked softly behind the walls. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to correct Olivia. To defend me just once. Instead she took another slow sip of wine and said, Your sister has always been better suited for protecting the family legacy. I think something inside me finally cracked in that moment. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly enough to hurt forever. Dad promised this would be equal, I whispered. My mother folded her napkin carefully beside her plate. Your father made many promises when he was weak and medicated. The words hit harder than I expected. Because Dad loved that vineyard more than anything he ever owned. Hearing her dismiss him so casually made me suddenly realize something terrifying. My mother had already rewritten the entire story of our family in her head long before he died. Olivia stood up first, carrying her wine glass toward the kitchen. Honestly, Claire, she said over her shoulder, you were never really part of this future anyway. I stayed at the table alone after they disappeared into the other room. The candles flickered softly beside the untouched plates while thunder rolled across the hills outside. Then I smelled gasoline. At first I thought the smell drifting through the dining room came from the old generator behind the house. Storms knocked the power out all the time in Sonoma during late October, and Dad always kept fuel containers stacked neatly inside the storage shed near the garage. But this smell was stronger. Sharper. Fresh. I sat frozen at the table listening to Olivia laugh softly somewhere down the hallway while cabinet doors opened and closed inside the kitchen. My mother's voice followed a moment later, low and calm enough that I could not make out the words. The candles flickered again as thunder rolled across the hills outside. Then the lights dimmed briefly before returning to normal. I stood slowly from the table, still holding the copy of the trust agreement in my hand. Something deep in my chest felt wrong. Not fear exactly. More like the quiet realization that I had misunderstood my entire family for years because part of me still wanted to believe we loved each other underneath everything else. The kitchen was empty when I stepped inside. Rain hammered against the windows above the sink, and one of the back doors near the mudroom stood slightly open, letting cold wind drift across the tile floor. I could hear my mother and Olivia speaking somewhere outside beneath the covered patio. She was always going to make this difficult, Olivia muttered. I told you she would not let it go. My mother answered too quietly for me to hear clearly. I moved closer to the doorway without making a sound. The vineyard stretched dark and endless beyond the porch lights, rows of vines disappearing into sheets of rain. Olivia leaned against one of the patio columns with her arms crossed tightly over her chest while my mother stood perfectly still beside the outdoor table. Even from behind, Diane Bennett carried herself like someone performing for an invisible audience. Elegant posture. Smooth movements. Controlled breathing. What happens if she contests the estate? Olivia asked nervously. Then she embarrasses herself publicly, my mother replied. Claire does not have the money or support for a legal fight. But the trust agreement will disappear. Her answer came so quickly it barely sounded human. My fingers tightened around the paper hidden against my side. For one terrible second, I suddenly remembered dozens of tiny moments from childhood that felt different now. The way my mother used to read Olivia bedtime stories while telling me I was old enough to put myself to sleep. The Christmas morning when Olivia received a pearl necklace from Paris while I opened a pair of work gloves because Dad mentioned I liked helping outside. The afternoon I came home crying after being bullied in middle school and my mother sighed impatiently before saying, maybe people would like you more if you smiled instead of looking so serious all the time. Back then I convinced myself she was simply harder on me because she expected more from me. Children are experts at turning neglect into responsibility. It hurts less that way. A floorboard creaked softly beneath my foot near the doorway. Olivia turned first. Her expression tightened immediately when she saw me standing there. My mother stayed calm. She always stayed calm. How long have you been listening? Olivia demanded. Long enough, I answered quietly. Rain blew sideways beneath the patio roof, carrying the sharp smell of gasoline stronger than before. I looked down then, finally noticing the red container near the outdoor grill station. The cap sat loose beside it. My mother followed my gaze without reacting. The grounds crew uses that for the equipment, she said smoothly. You look pale, Claire. Maybe you should sit down before you upset yourself further. Even now she sounded more annoyed than concerned. Olivia stepped closer toward her. Mom, we should just call the lawyer tomorrow. My mother kept her eyes fixed on me instead. No, she said softly. Tonight we settle this privately. Something about the way she said privately made cold move through my entire body. The rain outside grew heavier. Somewhere in the vineyard wind chimes rattled softly in the storm while my mother reached slowly into her sweater pocket and pulled out her phone. The first thing my mother did was start recording. Even now that detail stayed sharper in my mind than anything else about that night. Diane Bennett held her phone upright in front of her chest with both hands steady and practiced, like she had rehearsed the angle beforehand. Rain drummed against the patio roof while Olivia stood frozen beside the outdoor table, suddenly pale beneath the porch lights. Mom, she whispered nervously, maybe we should wait until morning. But Diane never looked at her. Her eyes stayed fixed on me with a calmness that felt almost unreal. Your father spent his entire life building this family name, she said softly. And all you have ever done is threaten it. I remember backing away slowly toward the kitchen doorway, confused more than frightened at first. Because some part of me still believed there had to be a limit to how far my mother would actually go. Families argue. Families say cruel things after funerals. Grief changes people. That is what I kept telling myself even while the smell of gasoline grew stronger around the patio. I am not threatening anyone, I said carefully. I just want the truth. Olivia finally looked at me then. Really looked at me. And for the first time in years I saw genuine fear behind her makeup and polished smile. Not fear for me. Fear of our mother. Claire, she said quietly, please stop talking. Thunder cracked somewhere over the hills hard enough to shake the windows inside the house. My mother lowered her phone slightly but never stopped recording. Do you know what your problem has always been? She asked. You mistake sacrifice for importance. Her words landed with terrifying clarity because they explained my entire life in one sentence. Every school pickup she missed. Every birthday forgotten. Every time she praised Olivia for achievements I quietly helped create behind the scenes. I was useful when work needed to be done. But usefulness was not the same thing as being loved. The cold wind blowing rain across the patio suddenly shifted direction, carrying droplets against my sweater and face. Somewhere behind me the back door creaked wider open. I glanced toward the kitchen instinctively. And in that tiny moment of distraction, my mother moved. Everything afterward blurred together strangely in my memory, not because I forgot it, but because shock rearranges time into disconnected pieces. The sound of Olivia gasping. My mother speaking in a strangely controlled voice. The harsh smell hanging in the air. The glow of the phone screen reflecting in the dark windows. Then confusion. Panic. Noise. I remember stumbling backward through the kitchen while thunder shook the house again overhead. I remember hearing Olivia crying somewhere behind me. And I remember my mother's voice louder now, trembling for the camera in a performance so convincing it still made me sick to think about later. "Call 911, she shouted dramatically. "Something is wrong with Claire." By the time emergency lights flooded the driveway outside, the entire house felt unreal. Paramedics rushed through rooms still glowing with candlelight while rainwater spread across the kitchen floor from the open patio door. Someone wrapped blankets around my shoulders. Someone else asked me questions I barely understood. Through all of it, Diane Bennett stayed perfectly composed. Crying when people looked at her. Silent when they did not. Even in the ambulance I caught one final glimpse of her standing beneath the porch lights beside Olivia. My sister looked shattered. My mother looked annoyed. At the hospital they told me I was lucky. Minor inhalation exposure. Shock. Some surface injuries requiring treatment and observation. Nothing life-threatening. Lucky. The word sounded absurd after what had just happened. Around 3 in the morning, after doctors finally stopped coming in and out of the room, Detective Ethan Cole arrived holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside was my father's trust agreement. The copy I had left folded on the dining room table. "We recovered this near the kitchen," he said carefully. "Your mother claims you were emotionally unstable tonight and may have caused the accident yourself after an argument about the estate." I stared at him without speaking. Outside my hospital window, dawn slowly began turning the clouds pale gray over Sonoma. Ethan hesitated before adding quietly, "Claire, your mother also submitted a preliminary insurance statement less than 2 hours after the ambulance left. By the 3rd day in the hospital, everyone treated me like something fragile that might break apart if they spoke too loudly nearby. Nurses lowered their voices when they entered my room. Doctors smiled carefully before explaining medications and discharge timelines. Even Detective Ethan Cole softened his tone whenever he asked questions about that night at the vineyard. Meanwhile, my mother transformed herself into the perfect image of public grief. Every local news segment showed the same version of Diane Bennett standing outside the vineyard gates in oversized sunglasses and neutral-colored sweaters, speaking quietly about family trauma and emotional stress after losing her husband. She told reporters I had been struggling mentally since Dad's death. She described me as overwhelmed, isolated, unstable. Watching those interviews from my hospital bed felt stranger than the fire itself. Because she looked sincere. That was always my mother's greatest talent. She knew exactly which version of herself the world wanted to see. "You do not have to watch this," Ethan said one afternoon while reaching for the remote control mounted beside my bed. I stopped him before he could change the channel. "Leave it on." Diane stood beside Olivia near the vineyard entrance while rainwater soaked the gravel driveway behind them. Olivia looked exhausted beneath oversized sunglasses, but my mother appeared composed as always. Graceful. Controlled. The same woman who used to host charity auctions and holiday galas with perfect floral arrangements and homemade desserts lined neatly across antique serving trays. "Claire is receiving the best care possible," Diane told reporters softly. "Right now our family simply needs privacy and compassion." Compassion. The word sat heavily in my chest long after the interview ended. That evening Ethan returned carrying a thin manila folder beneath one arm. He closed the hospital room door behind him before sitting beside the window. "I looked deeper into the insurance changes," he said quietly. "Your mother updated 3 separate policies over the past month." He slid copies across my bedside table. Numbers. Dates. Signatures. Adjustments increasing liability coverage tied specifically to the vineyard property and immediate family residence. One section included my name directly beneath a newly added clause. That was filed 9 days before the incident, Ethan explained. Which by itself is not illegal. But the timing raises concerns. I stared at my mother's signature near the bottom of the page. Smooth cursive handwriting. Perfect as always. Suddenly, I remembered being 10 years old sitting at the kitchen counter practicing signatures because Diane insisted messy handwriting reflected weak character. Olivia quit after 15 minutes. I spent 3 hours rewriting my name until my fingers cramped. My mother never praised me afterward. She simply nodded once and said, "Better." Ethan studied me carefully from across the room. "Claire," he said after a long pause, "there is something else." He pulled a tablet from his briefcase and opened a paused video frame. My stomach tightened immediately. It was the footage from that night again. Only this version looked slightly different. "Forensics recovered deleted fragments from your mother's phone cloud backup," he explained. This clip was not included in the version she provided insurance investigators. He pressed play slowly. The screen showed shaky darkness beneath the patio lights before my mother's voice drifted into the audio. Calm. Annoyed. "No, Olivia. Not yet. The camera angle is wrong." The clip ended after only 4 seconds. But it was enough. I felt cold spread through my entire body despite the heated hospital room. Ethan lowered the tablet carefully. "Claire," he asked quietly, "do you remember more than you have told us?" I looked past him toward the window where sunset painted the clouds pale gold above the distant hills. Then I remembered my mother standing outside the vineyard gates speaking gently to reporters while the entire town pitied her. I remembered the insurance forms filed before the incident even happened. I remembered Olivia's terrified expression on the patio. And for the first time since waking up in the hospital, I finally understood something important. My mother still believed she was in control of the story. Which meant she still believed I was weak enough to stay silent. I looked back at Ethan and forced my hands to tremble slightly against the blanket. "I do not remember much," I whispered. "Everything still feels blurry." Ethan watched me carefully for several seconds without speaking. Then very slowly, almost invisibly, he nodded. 2 weeks after the hospital released me, I returned to the vineyard carrying a paper bag filled with prescriptions and discharge instructions I never planned to read again. The driveway looked exactly the same as it always had. Long gravel path. White fences stretching beside rows of vines. The fountain Dad installed near the entrance still spilling water into the stone basin beneath yellow maple trees shedding leaves across the ground. Nothing about the property reflected what had happened there. That was the strange thing about family betrayal. The world never changes shape around it. Birds still sing. Coffee still brews. Neighbors still wave politely from across the street while entire lives quietly collapse behind closed doors. Olivia opened the front door before I could reach for the handle. She froze when she saw me standing there with my overnight bag hanging from one shoulder. "You are back already?" she asked carefully. Her voice sounded nervous now in a way I had never heard before. The old confidence was gone. I forced a tired smile and looked past her into the house. The doctors said familiar surroundings might help my recovery. Olivia hesitated. "Mom did not think you would want to come back here so soon." "Why?" I asked softly. "Should I not?" Before she could answer, my mother appeared at the far end of the hallway wearing one of her cream cashmere sweaters with a coffee mug balanced neatly between both hands. She stopped walking the moment she saw me. Just for a second, something cold flickered behind her expression. Not guilt. Disappointment. Then it vanished beneath practiced concern. "Claire," she said warmly, "you should have called first." I lowered my eyes slightly and tightened my grip on the overnight bag. "I still do not remember everything clearly," I said quietly. "But this is home." Diane studied me carefully for several seconds. Measuring. Calculating. Then she smiled and stepped forward to hug me lightly. Her perfume smelled exactly the same as it had my entire childhood. Expensive jasmine mixed with something sharper underneath. Of course, she whispered near my ear. We all just want you to heal. That night I stayed inside the guest room beside Dad's old office instead of my usual bedroom upstairs. My mother claimed the renovations were unfinished after the incident. But sometime after midnight, I quietly walked upstairs anyway. The hallway lights remained dim except for a single lamp glowing near Olivia's room. I moved slowly past family portraits lining the walls until I reached my old bedroom door. Locked. I stood there staring at the brass handle while cold settled into my chest. My room had never once been locked in 34 years. Not even when I moved away for college. Downstairs voices drifted faintly through the floorboards. My mother and Olivia were still awake. I walked silently toward the upstairs balcony overlooking the living room below. Their voices became clearer near the railing. She remembers more than she is saying, Olivia whispered nervously. I can tell. My mother answered calmly. If Claire remembered anything useful, she would already be speaking to investigators. But Detective Cole keeps showing up here. Because he is fishing. Glass clinked softly below. Ice shifting inside one of my mother's crystal tumblers. The important thing now, Diane continued, is finalizing the estate before Claire becomes emotionally unstable again. Olivia lowered her voice further. And if she contests it? My mother laughed quietly. Actually laughed. After everything that happened, who do you think people will believe? The grieving widow caring for her traumatized daughter? Or Claire? Silence stretched for several seconds afterward. Then Olivia spoke again, barely above a whisper. I still hear her coughing sometimes in my head. My mother's answer came cold and immediate. Then stop thinking about it. I stepped backward away from the balcony before they could hear my breathing. My hands trembled slightly as I returned downstairs toward the guest room. But this time it was not fear making my body shake. It was clarity. For the first time in my life, I finally understood that my mother was not hiding her cruelty anymore. She simply believed she had already won. Inside the guest room, I closed the door quietly before pulling my phone from beneath the mattress where I had hidden it earlier. The recording application was still running. Over the next 10 days, I became very careful about appearing weak. It was surprisingly easy. I moved slowly through the house with tired eyes and shaking hands while my mother watched me the way people study cracks forming in expensive glass. I forgot small details on purpose. Repeated questions. Pretended loud noises startled me more than they really did. Sometimes I stopped speaking in the middle of sentences and stared blankly at walls until Olivia looked uncomfortable enough to leave the room. My mother responded exactly the way I expected. She became softer. Kinder. Almost affectionate. Every morning she brought tea to the guest room and asked gentle questions about my memory. Every afternoon she reminded me how stressful legal matters could worsen emotional recovery. And every evening she made sure someone from town happened to stop by long enough to witness her devoted care for her struggling daughter. The performance would have impressed me if I had not grown up watching her rehearse versions of herself for decades. But beneath all the softness, something colder continued moving quietly underneath the surface of the house. 2 days after I returned home, a psychiatrist arrived unannounced during lunch. My mother introduced him as Dr. Raymond Ellis, a specialist helping families navigate post-trauma adjustment. He wore expensive loafers and carried a leather folder thick with paperwork. Your mother is worried about you, he explained gently while sitting across from me in Dad's old study. Apparently you have experienced confusion, emotional instability, and memory gaps since the incident. I lowered my eyes toward the floorboards and twisted my hands together nervously. I do not always sleep well, I admitted quietly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother relax slightly beside the doorway. Dr. Ellis smiled sympathetically. That is completely understandable. Sometimes temporary residential treatment can help patients recover in a more structured environment. Residential treatment. The phrase settled heavily into the room between us. Not a hospital. Not therapy. Somewhere quieter. Controlled. Somewhere far enough away for legal documents to finish changing hands while nobody questioned why Claire Bennett disappeared from public view. I glanced toward my mother. Do you think I need that? Diane stepped forward immediately with practiced concern filling her expression. Only if it helps you heal, sweetheart. Sweetheart. She had not called me that since elementary school. Later that evening, after Dr. Ellis left, Detective Ethan Cole arrived under the excuse of updating the investigation report. My mother greeted him warmly at the front door while Olivia stayed upstairs avoiding eye contact entirely. Ethan asked whether we could speak privately in the Vineyard office. Diane hesitated for only half a second before agreeing. The moment the office door closed behind us, Ethan pulled a small evidence envelope from inside his coat pocket. Forensics finished restoring more deleted files from your mother's cloud storage, he said quietly. Inside the envelope sat a printed still image from another video fragment. My stomach tightened immediately. The image showed part of the covered patio from the night everything happened. Rain blurred the edges of the frame, but two figures remained visible beneath the porch lights. My mother holding her phone upright. Olivia standing near the outdoor table with both hands covering her mouth. And beside the table, partially hidden near the red gas container, sat a silver barbecue lighter reflecting brightly against the dark floor tiles. Ethan lowered his voice further. There is audio too. He played a short clip from his phone. Static crackled beneath heavy rain before Olivia's voice emerged shakily through the speaker. Mom, maybe this has gone too far. Then my mother answered calmly enough to make my blood run cold all over again. Everything in this family survives because of me. The recording ended there. Silence filled Dad's office except for the ticking grandfather clock near the bookshelf. Ethan studied me carefully. Claire, he said quietly, I think your mother is preparing to move faster now. We need enough evidence before she realizes the investigation changed direction. I looked around the office slowly. Dad's framed vineyard map still hung neatly on the walls beside old family photographs. In every single picture, my mother stood at the center while the rest of us arranged ourselves around her like supporting characters in someone else's story. I finally understood then that Diane Bennett never loved control because she feared losing her family. She loved control because it allowed her to decide which version of reality survived after the damage was done. 3 nights later, my mother hosted what she called a small family dinner to discuss the future of the vineyard. The dining room looked beautiful in the way expensive funerals often do. Candles glowing softly against polished silverware. Fresh flowers arranged perfectly in crystal vases. Rain tapping gently against the windows while jazz music drifted quietly from hidden speakers in the ceiling. Olivia barely touched her food the entire evening. She kept twisting the stem of her wine glass between nervous fingers while my mother carried the conversation almost entirely by herself. Diane Bennett always performed best when she believed she had complete control of the room. The attorney finalized most of the estate transfers this morning, she announced calmly while slicing into roasted salmon. Thankfully everything should move forward without unnecessary conflict. I lowered my eyes toward my plate and forced my voice to sound fragile. I still do not understand all the paperwork. My mother smiled warmly across the table. That is why I have handled it for you, sweetheart. Sweetheart again. The word no longer sounded affectionate. It sounded rehearsed. Upstairs, hidden inside my old locked bedroom, Detective Ethan Cole and 2 investigators waited silently beside the restored cloud files, insurance documents, and audio recordings my mother believed no one else had heard. The plan had been Ethan's idea. People like Diane only confess when they believe the audience already belongs to them, he explained earlier that afternoon while wiring discreet recording equipment beneath the dining room table. She needs to feel safe enough to become honest. Halfway through dessert, my mother finally brought up the psychiatric facility directly. Dr. Ellis thinks long-term residential treatment could really help your recovery, she said gently while folding her napkin beside her plate. Somewhere peaceful. Structured. Away from unnecessary stress. Olivia looked down immediately. I noticed her hands trembling slightly against her lap. Would I lose access to Dad's trust while I am there? I asked quietly. My mother's expression barely shifted at all. Claire, she sighed softly, money should not matter more than your health. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Cold fingers. Perfect manicure. Steady pulse. Your father would want us protecting the family legacy from public embarrassment. Family legacy. There it was again. The phrase she valued more than any actual person sitting in front of her. I slowly pulled my hand away and looked directly into her eyes for the first time since leaving the hospital. You mean the version where I disappear quietly? Silence settled over the room immediately. Olivia stopped breathing entirely for a second. My mother tilted her head slightly, studying me carefully. What exactly are you implying? She asked calmly. I stood up slowly from the table. I think you know. Then I pressed the small remote hidden inside my sweater pocket. Upstairs, footsteps moved across the hallway floorboards. A second later, the television mounted above the dining room fireplace flickered to life. My mother's face drained of color instantly the moment the first recovered video clip appeared on screen. Rain blurred the patio lights behind her while her voice echoed clearly through the room. No, Olivia. Not yet. The camera angle is wrong. Olivia covered her mouth with both hands. Oh my God, she whispered. The next recording played immediately after. Everything in this family survives because of me. Then another clip. The sound of rain. My mother's calm voice. If Claire remembered anything useful, she would already be speaking to investigators. By the fourth recording, Diane finally stood up from the table so abruptly her wine glass shattered across the hardwood floor. Turn this off, she snapped. Not grieving. Not frightened. Angry. Ethan stepped into the dining room beside the investigators before anyone moved. We cannot do that, Mrs. Bennett. Olivia burst into tears immediately. Mom, please just tell them the truth. But my mother never looked at her. She stared directly at me instead with an expression I had never seen before in my entire life. Fear. Real fear. Not because she regretted what happened. Because for the first time, she no longer controlled which version of the story survived. Outside, rain continued falling softly across the vineyard Dad spent his life building. And standing there beneath the candlelight while investigators quietly read my mother her rights, I finally understood something that had taken me 34 years to learn. Some people do not destroy families because they lose control. They destroy families because control is the only thing they have ever truly loved.